On October 21st, 2006, at 7:46 p.m., a routine radio check at Rocky Mountain National Park failed unexpectedly. Ranger Megan Hartley, 31 years old, did not answer her call sign. Her patrol horse, Comet, was also unaccounted for somewhere in the northern backcountry. Within minutes, supervisors realized this was not a simple mistransmission. A federal law enforcement ranger and her mount had gone dark in one of the most rugged parks in Colorado. 5 years later, a buried truth would finally drag this case back into the light. The mountain kept its silence, something else did not. Inside the park's dispatch room that night, everything first looked normal. Radios crackled. Rangers checked in as they wrapped up patrols and turned toward paved roads. When the dispatcher reached Megan's unit, there was only static. He tried again, using her unit number and her last known trail. Still nothing. Procedure required a third attempt after a short pause. The clock moved past 7:50 p.m. A single missed check-in could be a minor glitch. 3 from the same ranger in under 10 minutes meant serious trouble. Megan was not a rookie. She knew the northern trails and their dead zones. Comet was a seasoned mount, used to steep grades and loose rock. 2 reliable partners do not simply disappear together. The supervisor ordered nearby units to report if they had seen her. None had. Her last confirmed position was a narrow drainage leading toward an unpaved service road. The map on the wall showed forest and ridgeline where her radio should have come alive. Before the first search team left headquarters, a familiar pickup pulled into the staff lot. Robert Hartley, Megan's father and a retired ranger, stepped through the door. He had heard traffic about a silent unit over his scanner at home and driven straight in. He walked to the map, found her sector without asking, and spoke quietly. "Tell me exactly when she stopped answering." By 8:30 p.m., radios were reassigned, trucks were fueled, and horses were saddled under harsh yard lights. On paper, it was the start of a standard missing ranger response. In reality, it was the moment a simple silence became a case that still divides this park. Megan Hartley was not the kind of ranger who slipped through the cracks of a schedule. Born in Fort Collins in 1975, she grew up visiting Rocky Mountain National Park on weekends, first as a kid riding in the back seat, later as a teenager hiking ahead of her parents. By the time she joined the National Park Service at 23, she already knew trail names most visitors never heard. In 2006, Megan was in her 8th season at the park. She held a full commission as a federal law enforcement ranger, trained in search and rescue and medical response. Her personnel file showed clean performance reviews, no recent disciplinary notes, and a steady pattern of overtime in the backcountry. She preferred patrols on horseback. Comet was her assigned mount for almost 4 years, logged in maintenance records more than 600 patrol miles with her. Her life outside work was simple. She rented a small 1-bedroom apartment in Estes Park, 10 minutes from the Beaver Meadows entrance. Phone records showed regular calls to her older sister in Denver, rare bar tabs, and no active dating profiles investigators could find later. Coworkers described her as reserved but direct, the person you wanted on scene when something went wrong. The most important relationship in this case, though, was the one that brought Robert Hartley into the dispatch room that October night. Robert had worn the same uniform for 3 decades before retiring in 2004. He patrolled the same northern drainages his daughter now covered. He taught her to read contour lines, to judge distance by how long her breathing stayed elevated on a climb, to recognize when a radio silence felt wrong. Inside the ranger station, people still called him Bob out of habit. He knew whose truck belonged to which shift, which desk had been reassigned, which ranger was out on medical leave. When Megan disappeared, he did not wait for a formal notification. He arrived before some on-duty staff realized which unit was missing. If you want more long-form breakdowns of cases like this one, you can subscribe so you do not miss the next investigation. What no one in that building knew yet was that Megan had already written one quiet warning about the backcountry that never reached her father. The first search teams walked out of Rocky Mountain National Park headquarters before 9 p.m. on October 21st, 2006. 2 truck crews were assigned to drive the main roads and pull off at every turnout to scan for Megan's headlights. A mounted team was sent toward the northern drainages where her last radio check had been logged earlier in the afternoon. Supervisors treated it as an urgent but familiar problem at first, a ranger overdue from the field. By 11 p.m., that assumption was hard to defend. Helicopter support from the State Patrol arrived and began a slow grid over tree line, using a spotlight and thermal camera. There was no heat signature from a horse and rider. There was no stalled truck matching Megan's assigned vehicle. The first shock came from silence, not from what they found. On the second day, more than 30 personnel were involved. A note in the log mentions one early hoof print on a side spur, never fully followed up that week. Search logs show ground teams on foot, K9 units, and additional rangers on horseback. They swept along creeks and checked low-lying meadows for signs of a fall. They flagged every hoof print they could still read in soft ground. Mid-afternoon, a call from 2 hikers near the Mummy Range changed everything. The hikers, both adults from Nebraska, reported being followed and briefly charged by a large animal on a narrow trail. They described a dark shape, heavy footfalls, and a low sound behind them before they scrambled uphill. They did not see the animal clearly, but they were certain it was not a deer or elk. A park wildlife biologist interviewed them on scene and wrote that the behavior could match an aggressive black bear. Once that note hit the incident board, the strategy shifted. Incident commanders re-centered the map around the hikers' GPS coordinates, more than 3 miles east of Megan's planned loop. Searchers were told to watch for bear sign and to carry extra deterrent spray. The working theory, written in the log that afternoon, was simple and grim. A lone ranger on horseback might have crossed paths with the same animal. If that was true, the missing person case had just become a probable wildlife fatality, even without a body. What no one realized was how many hours of effort that single theory would pull away from where Megan most likely vanished. Within 3 weeks, the official search for Ranger Megan Hartley changed shape. The number of people in the field dropped. The helicopter was reassigned to fire duty. Daily briefings turned into twice-weekly updates. On November 15, 2006, Rocky Mountain National Park documented the case as an unresolved missing person with a probable wildlife involvement note in the file. There was still no body. There was still no sign of Comet. Winter closed in fast at higher elevations. Snow covered faint tracks that searchers might have missed in October. The park brought in a critical incident stress team and scheduled debriefs for staff who had worked the operation. One memo from that period advised managers to support family acceptance of likely outcome. The likely outcome, written in plain language, was that a bear had killed Megan and carried her off trail. Robert Hartley read that memo in a conference room at park headquarters. He asked one question: "Show me where." No one at the table could point to a single place on the map where any trace of his daughter had actually been found. No blood, no torn equipment, no broken radio, just an empty rectangle on a wall covered in pins. In January 2007, when snow made high country patrols impossible, the park formally scaled back active searching. Megan's file moved from the incident board into a cabinet behind the chief ranger's desk. Federal investigators checked her bank accounts and credit cards. Nothing moved after October 21st. There were no secret trips, no hidden life. On paper, she had simply stopped existing. Robert did not stop. He cleared a wall in his small home in Estes Park and began taping up topographic maps. He added older survey sheets he kept from his own career. He printed satellite images from public government websites. He circled drainages, ridge lines, and unnamed saddles where a ranger on horseback might cut time between sectors. By summer, he was in the park 3 or 4 days a week with a GPS unit and a notebook. He walked game trails he had shown Megan when she was a teenager. He marked rock slides, washed out gullies, and informal crossings that were never on official maps. Line by line, he drew a different picture of the northern backcountry, one built from thousands of small observations. Years later, detectives would admit that Robert's homemade map of the park was more detailed than anything the agency had at the time, and that one annotation he made in 2008 was far more important than anyone realized. In May 2011, almost 5 years after Megan vanished, Rocky Mountain National Park approved a small research project in a remote drainage. A geomorphologist from Colorado State University, Dr. Emily Novak, brought 3 graduate students to study erosion patterns in an unnamed ravine north of Trail Ridge Road. The location had no official trail, no visitor use, and no connection on paper to the Hartley case. Their main tool was a ground-penetrating radar unit, a machine that looks like a low cart and sends pulses into the soil. On May 18th, the team laid out a simple grid at the bottom of the ravine and started pushing the unit back and forth. Most of the screen output showed clean, horizontal layers. Then one pass lit up differently. The display showed a solid, oblong shape about 4 feet below the surface, with a clear outline and unusual density. It did not look like a rock cluster. It did not match the signature of tree roots or buried metal. Dr. Novak marked the coordinates and flagged off a square around the anomaly. Her field notes from that day used neutral language. Subsurface mass, coherent, non-geologic profile. The next morning, after calling park staff and obtaining permission for a limited excavation, the team returned with shovels and smaller hand tools. They removed the first foot of soil in neat layers, logging depth and texture. At around 3 feet, a graduate student's shovel struck something that did not feel like stone. When they cleared it by hand, a curved, pale surface appeared. They kept working with brushes and trowels. A rib cage emerged, then a spine, then the long bones of legs. What lay in the pit was a nearly complete skeleton of a large horse, lying on its side in anatomical order. There were no signs of crushing or scattering. Someone had buried the animal intact. 2 front hooves still held rusted horseshoes. A farrier who had worked at the park for decades drove out that afternoon. He picked up one shoe, turned it in his hand, and pointed to a small notch he always filed into his work. He checked his logbook in his truck and found the matching entry from 2003. The horse in the ground was Comet, and the bear theory now had a 4-foot-deep problem. The discovery of Comet's grave forced the park to treat the ravine like a crime scene. Rangers taped off the slope, logged GPS coordinates, and photographed every stage of the excavation. By the time the sun dropped behind the ridge, the horse's bones had been removed from the pit, wrapped, and carried to a staging area under a white canopy tent. The National Park Service requested a forensic anthropologist from Denver. Dr. Harold Crane arrived 2 days later with a small team. They laid Comet's skeleton out on clean plastic sheeting, lining up each bone in anatomical order. A technician read off item numbers while another typed. Every piece of the horse was photographed, measured, and bagged. If a bear had brought Comet down, Dr. Crane expected to see it on the bones. Predators leave tooth marks and scored edges. Rockfalls crush ribs and limbs and scatter fragments. That pattern simply was not there. The skeleton was intact. Joints were in place. There were no major fractures in the skull, ribs, or spine. Only one area drew his attention. The long bone of the right front leg showed a thin crack near the lower end. It could have happened when the pit was dug or when the body settled. Still, he examined it under magnification. Inside the narrow fissure, something caught the light. He asked for smaller instruments. Using a fine steel probe and tweezers, he worked the edge of the crack. A tiny dark speck loosened and came free. It was not soil. It was not stone. Under a handheld microscope, the fragment had sharp faces and a dull metallic sheen. Dr. Crane ruled out lead from a bullet. The shape was wrong. The location in the leg was wrong. He documented the find, sealed the fragment in a labeled vial, and turned it over to law enforcement with a chain of custody form attached. For the first time, investigators had physical proof that Comet had been struck, not just lost. The working notes that day added a single new line to a 5-year-old file, evidence of a high-force impact from an artificial object. What that object was would not be clear until laboratory scientists took the case apart in a different way. The burial of Comet pushed the case out of park management and into the state's cold case unit. In June 2011, Detective Dana Ruiz from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation drove up to Rocky Mountain National Park with a thin folder that did not match the size of the problem. On paper, she had one missing ranger, one buried horse, and a metal fragment of unknown origin. Everything else was guesswork. Her first meeting was not with a park supervisor. It was with Robert Hartley. They sat in a conference room that had once hosted safety briefings and retirement cakes. Robert carried a long canvas tube and did not say much until he set it on the table. When he unrolled the contents, it was not one map. It was several, taped together and marked in different colors. Dana saw official trail lines in black ink. Next to them were red pencil routes with dates from 2007, 2008, 2009. Blue lines traced seasonal creeks that ran only during certain months. Green dashes marked game trails. Tiny notes filled the margins. Loose talus, avoid in snow. Old fire scar, low cover. Informal horse crossing. Used 2002 to 2003. Robert pointed to a narrow ridge above the ravine where Comet had been buried. He had drawn a thin line there 3 years earlier and labeled it Old Elk Track, Fast Traverse. He told her he had walked it with Megan when she was still in high school. It did not appear on any current park map. For Dana, this was more than a grieving parent's project. It was a functional record of where the official search never went. It also lined up with something else in the file that had been easy to miss. A patrol log entry Megan had written in July 2006 about fresh digging near historic foundations north of approved zone and repeat contact with the same male using equipment without a permit. That note had been filed as a minor resource violation. It was now the only documented sign that Megan believed someone was working the backcountry with purpose and ignoring warnings. Before leaving the room, Dana copied coordinates from Robert's map into her own notebook and underlined the words historic foundations twice, because the buried horse was no longer the only anomaly in that ravine system. Back at her office in Denver, Dana Ruiz asked for everything with Megan's name on it from the year before she vanished. Patrol logs, warning slips, citation copies, email traffic between rangers and supervisors. The park scanned and sent more than 400 pages. She did not start with the missing person report. She started with the boring paperwork. Most of it was routine. Food storage warnings and campgrounds. Illegal campfire notes. Minor traffic stops on park roads. Megan's handwriting showed up again and again. Neat block letters, consistent wording. Then one name repeated where it should not have. Colin Mercer. The first contact was in March 2006, listed as an educational contact for use of metal detector in closed cultural area. Megan documented a verbal warning and noted the location as near historic cabin footings, North Sector. The second entry, from June 2006, was different. This time it was a formal citation. Offense, unauthorized excavation on federal land. Megan wrote that she found Mercer with a shovel and a bucket, digging a pit roughly 3 feet deep near a collapsed chimney base. Her narrative described him as argumentative, minimizes impacts, claims to be doing research. She seized the shovel and recorded his driver's license details from a Colorado address just outside the park boundary. In the original 2006 case review, Mercer's name appeared only once in a short list of people interviewed. A deputy had called him after Megan went missing. He said he was at a dental appointment in Denver that day. The deputy had checked that the office existed and moved on. The file did not show anyone requesting appointment records or confirming that he actually sat in the chair. Dana put a yellow tab on every page where Mercer's name appeared and another on every mention of fresh digging or unauthorized tools. On a separate legal pad, she wrote 3 lines. Ranger documents repeat violator. Ranger disappears in same general sector. Ranger's horse buried with care. The bear theory, so central in 2006, did not explain a buried animal. It did not explain a man who dug holes where he was told not to dig. When she looked at the timeline pinned to her office wall, Mercer's dental appointment started to look less like an alibi and more like a testable claim that no one had ever pushed hard enough. The next break came from a lab, not the mountains. In August 2011, a materials scientist at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation called Detective Dana Ruiz about the fragment from Comet's leg. They had run it through a scanning electron microscope and elemental analysis. It was not steel, not iron, and not lead. The alloy profile matched tungsten carbide, a very hard, brittle material used in specialized cutting tools. The lab report was specific. The fragment most likely came from the tip of a rock hammer or similar impact tool designed for breaking dense rock. It was not the kind of hammer you buy in a hardware aisle. It was the kind you order from a geology supply catalog or a prospector website. The fracture pattern on the bone suggested a direct, high-force blow. Dana wrote 3 words at the bottom of the report. Not a bear. A buried horse with no bite marks, no fall damage, and a tungsten carbide chip in its leg pointed toward one thing. A person with a serious tool had struck Comet hard enough to drive a shard into bone. She went back to Colin Mercer. His prior contacts with rangers already showed an interest in historic sites and digging. Now she wanted to know what he owned. Using a search warrant for business and purchase records, she pulled his financial history for the last 10 years. Credit card statements showed orders from rock and mineral supply companies, online auctions for old bottles, and a 2004 purchase of a high-end rock hammer with a tungsten carbide tip. With that in hand, Dana sought a second warrant, this time for Mercer's house and detached workshop just outside Estes Park. In September 2011, a team of investigators, a park law enforcement officer, and a cultural resources specialist executed the warrant. They expected to find tools. They did. Hammers, chisels, buckets, metal detectors. What they did not expect was the level of organization in his finds. In a back room, flat file drawers held rows of labeled artifacts, square nails, ceramic shards, rusted hardware, glass stamped with dates from the 1800s. A park historian on scene recognized several pieces as matching a specific, protected historic site deep in the same ravine system where Comet had been buried. They still did not have the hammer that chipped Comet's leg, but they now had proof that Mercer had been quietly stripping history out of the exact slice of backcountry tied to Megan's last patrol. The evidence from Colin Mercer's workshop shifted the case from suspicion to action. In October 2011, Detective Dana Ruiz sat down with prosecutors in Larimer County to lay out the chain step by step. A missing ranger on patrol, a buried park horse with no predator damage, a tungsten carbide fragment in bone, repeated citations to the same man for illegal digging in the same remote sector, artifacts in his drawers that matched one specific, protected historic site north of Trail Ridge Road. The district attorney's office agreed there was enough for a custodial interview and likely more. A judge signed an arrest warrant for Mercer on felony charges related to looting federal property. It was not yet a homicide warrant. Legally, Megan Hartley was still a missing person without a recovered body. On October 19, 2011, investigators picked Mercer up at his house and drove him to a CBI interview room in Denver. He arrived in jeans and a work shirt, looking more annoyed than frightened. He repeated what he had told the deputy in 2006. He said he admired history. He said he had never hurt anyone. He said he was in Denver at a dental appointment the day Megan disappeared. Dana let him talk. Then she opened a thin folder and slid one page across the table. It was a fax from the dental office, obtained under warrant. The document showed that Mercer had canceled his appointment the morning of October 21, 2006, at 8:12 a.m. He had never checked in. His alibi had been nothing but an entry on a schedule. She showed him photographs from his workshop next. The square nails, the ceramic patterns, the labels with GPS coordinates that matched the protected site in the ravine system. Finally, she placed an enlarged image of the tungsten carbide fragment on the table and explained what the lab had found in Comet's leg. The room stayed quiet for a long time after that. Mercer's shoulders dropped. His answers changed from full sentences to fragments. When he finally asked for water, he asked a second question with it. He wanted to know if it would matter where he said Megan's body was. When the recording resumed after Colin Mercer's question, Detective Dana Ruiz did not answer him directly. She told him the charges he already faced and the ones that would follow if he withheld information. She laid out the evidence again in plain language. The canceled dental appointment, the citations from Megan, the artifacts tied to one historic site, the buried horse with a tool fragment in its leg. Mercer stared at the table for almost a full minute. Then he started talking. He said he had hiked into the ravine system early on October 21, 2006, carrying his rock hammer, a small shovel, and a pack. He admitted he was working a productive spot he believed held bottles and hardware from a long-gone logging camp. Late in the morning, he heard a horse on the ridge above him. According to Mercer, Megan rode into view and recognized him immediately. She climbed down, told him he was under arrest for felony violations, and reached for her radio. He claimed he panicked, swung the hammer once, and watched her fall. When Comet reared and pulled away, he swung again, striking the horse. He insisted he never meant to kill anyone. The facts on the ground said otherwise. He described how he dug the pit for Comet, using the confiscated shovel, and rolled the horse in before covering the body with soil and rock. With Megan, he took a different approach. He told Dana about a narrow rock fissure he had found years earlier, hidden behind dense brush on a shaded slope. That afternoon and into the night, he dragged and carried her body along a faint game trail to that opening and pushed her into the dark. 2 days later, a joint recovery team from the park, County Search and Rescue, and CBI followed Mercer back into the same backcountry. Robert Hartley walked with them. Technical rescuers set anchors and descended into the vertical crack he indicated. At the bottom, they found human remains in what was left of a ranger uniform. A badge was still pinned to the fabric. Dental records and service documents confirmed what everyone in the command post already knew. Megan Hartley was no longer missing, and the case was no longer just a disappearance file. Colin Mercer was charged in late 2011 with first-degree murder, tampering with a body, and multiple felonies tied to looting federal property. Prosecutors also added counts for destroying archaeological resources inside a national park. The charges reflected both what he did to Megan Hartley and what he had been doing quietly for years in the backcountry. His attorneys pushed for a plea to a lesser homicide charge. They argued sudden panic, no planning, and a single blow. The district attorney refused. The state's position was simple. A ranger performing her duty had been killed, her horse buried, and her body hidden in a fissure no one was meant to find. The trial began in Fort Collins in March 2013. Jurors saw maps of Rocky Mountain National Park and photographs from the ravine. They saw images of Comet's grave and the bones laid out under the evidence tent. A materials scientist explained the tungsten carbide fragment. A park historian walked them through the artifacts from Mercer's workshop and the protected site they came from. Detective Dana Ruiz testified about the canceled dental appointment and the sequence of warrants. Robert Hartley took the stand to describe his daughter's work and the years he spent walking the northern drainages alone. He also described the annotation on his own map that matched the ridge above the ravine, the same ridge Mercer used the day he moved Megan's body. Mercer's recorded confession played for the jury. His voice did not match the accident described by the defense. He talked about digging, being confronted, and deciding that prison and the loss of his collection were unacceptable. He admitted lifting Megan, hauling her across rough ground, and pushing her into the rock crack. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all major counts. The judge sentenced Mercer to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus additional time for the resource crimes. In the years that followed, Rocky Mountain National Park overhauled its response protocols for missing staff and serious violations in remote cultural sites. Robert began volunteering with the park's education program, speaking to new rangers and visitors about the cost of treating minor looting as background noise. Even with a conviction, one question still hangs over the case every time a radio check goes unanswered.